Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down this really fascinating friction that exists right at the heart of modern football. We're looking at two entirely different tactical schools of thought, the pragmatist and the philosopher. And to do that, we're going to dive deep into the tactical blueprints of two iconic figures whose careers are forever linked, but honestly, whose managerial styles literally could not be more different.
I want to hook you right away with this quote from Andrea Pirlo's UEFA Pro license thesis. He says, "The role in modern football is no longer a position, but a function." Just keep that concept in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer, because it completely anchors our whole conceptual journey today. As you'll see, this idea of a player's function absolutely dictates how the modern game is played at the highest levels.
Okay, part 1. The Diamond Returns. So before we get deep into Pirlo's philosophy, let's talk about his former manager, Carlo Ancelotti. Ancelotti recently made some serious waves by returning to a pretty controversial shape at Real Madrid, the 4-4-2 diamond. If you know your football history, you know this is super reminiscent of his dominant AC Milan days back in the early 2000s, a system where, ironically, Andrea Pirlo famously pulled the strings. But look, this is pure unapologetic pragmatism. Ancelotti looks at his squad and is actively scrunching 8 players centrally just to accommodate his superstars. He needed to fit Jude Bellingham in as a number 10, right? And to do that, he forces touchline wingers, guys like Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo, into unfamiliar central roles. It sacrifices high attacking width and pretty much totally isolates the fullbacks on the flanks. But Ancelotti does it anyway, because it gets his absolute best talent on the pitch all at once, and honestly, it cleans up the messy defensive transitions they suffered from the season prior.
And this right here, this perfectly frames the core narrative arc we're exploring today. On one side, you have Carlo Ancelotti's player-centric pragmatism. He will happily adapt and twist a formation to unlock the raw talent of his best players, even if it looks totally unbalanced on a tactical chalkboard. On the exact opposite side, you have his former pupil, Andrea Pirlo. Pirlo believes in building a highly structured, progressive blueprint, a systems-centric philosophy, where players have to learn to function strictly within a specific spatial grid.
Moving on to Section 2, Player to Philosopher.
It is honestly so fascinating to watch Pirlo move from being the ultimate deep-lying playmaker, literally the heartbeat of Ancelotti's old pragmatic diamond, to a manager sitting down and writing out his own rigid, highly theoretical tactical manifesto. And that manifesto is exactly what we have here. This is the cover of Pirlo's official thesis for the Italian Football Federation, titled Il Calcio che vorrei, or The Football I Would Like. In this document, Pirlo draws some heavy inspiration from the legendary systems of Cruyff, Guardiola, Van Gaal, and Conte. He doesn't just want to fit good players onto a pitch, he mandates a style of total 11-man active participation.
As this quote from his thesis really emphasizes, Pirlo's core ambition is incredibly profound. He basically wants to manipulate space and time. He wants to totally dominate the ball and command the game through collective effort, which is a stark contrast to simply relying on individual moments of brilliance. Everyone attacks and everyone defends. No exceptions.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 3, the progressive blueprint.
So, how does he actually achieve this total football on the grass? Well, it starts from the very back. Pirlo lays out 3 specific rules of construction to systematically bypass high pressing. First, conduct, which means a player should actually dribble the ball forward to deliberately provoke an opponent into pressing them. Second, filter, passing the ball vertically through the lines that just opened up. And third, if the first 2 aren't an option, increase time and space by safely circulating possession. He strictly forbids his defenders from launching long, unpredictable panic passes.
To execute this, Pirlo relies on what he calls the rombo di palleggio, essentially a rhombus of possession. It's a diamond-shaped passing structure that forms around whoever has the ball. It guarantees lateral support and, crucially, gives a vertical option to bypass pressure cleanly. The vertex, the top tip of this rhombus, is constantly trying to position itself between the opponent's lines. And what's really cool is that the modern goalkeeper is actively utilized as the base of this rhombus to ensure a totally clean exit from the back.
Now, this entire structure is built to find what Xavi famously called the third man. Pirlo anchors his whole system on this concept. By utilizing rapid diagonal passing through that rhombus, you inevitably find a free third player moving into open space, bypassing the defensive lines entirely. As Pirlo notes in his thesis, when it's executed perfectly, it's virtually impossible to defend against.
Which brings us to Section 4, attacking the spaces.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens once Pirlo's team successfully bypass that pressure and enter the opponent's half. The speed of play shifts dramatically here. It goes from slow and methodical to incredibly rapid and direct. He demands that three macro principles, he calls them containers, must always be kept full. You've got ampezza, which is extreme width to stretch the defense, rifinitura, occupying the finishing zone between the opponent's midfield and defense, and profondità, which is the constant, aggressive attacking of depth behind the defensive line.
Now, to actually keep those three containers full, Pirlo's system dictates that his players have to occupy all 5 vertical zones of the pitch simultaneously. You have players perfectly distributed across both wings, both half spaces, and the center. Because you have to fill those 5 vertical zones, Pirlo's attacking shape naturally morphs into this massive 2-3-5 structure. He's literally pushing 5 players into the absolute forward line. He writes that doing this creates continuous, unpredictable attacks into depth, ensuring that the opposing defenders aren't just physically overwhelmed, but, and I love this phrasing, constantly and entirely mentally disturbed by the sheer volume of threats. All right, Section 5, Aggressive Defensive Transitions.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is understanding the risk. Pushing 5 players forward obviously leaves you vulnerable if you lose the ball. And that brings us to the defensive side of the blueprint. For the philosopher, defending isn't about surviving. It's honestly just another tool utilized to get the ball back and dominate possession. When Pirlo's team loses the ball, they don't drop back. They instantly collapse on the ball carrier. But the primary goal of that first pressing player isn't actually to make a risky tackle. It's simply to cover passing lanes, induce panic, and force an error while the rest of the team completely suffocates the space.
Pirlo backed this up with hard data in his thesis, and the numbers are actually staggering when you see them laid out. Get this, his staff's research proved that elite teams perform 30 to 35 of these aggressive re-aggressions per game, with a massive 70% success rate of immediate recovery. On average, it only takes 5 seconds and involves 2.5 players to win it back. To put that into perspective, that proves mathematically why high-intensity counterpressing is utterly vital to a modern possession-based system. Naturally, if your forwards and midfielders are counterpressing like crazy, your defensive line can't just sit deep. They have to push aggressively all the way up to the halfway line to keep the team compact. This absolutely forces the modern goalkeeper to step out of the penalty box and act as a sweeper to cover all that dangerous open space behind the high line. But hey, sometimes the press gets beaten, right? Pirlo maps that out too. If they're forced back, he mandates a remarkably strict zonal marking system inside the penalty box. The box is mathematically divided into 6 specific zones, and defenders are instructed to orient themselves strictly based on the ball's position across those 6 zones. It's all about total structural coverage rather than just chasing individual attackers around the box. Bringing it all together, Section 6, the modern tactical dilemma.
So, the crucial point is this. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the chaotic brilliance of Real Madrid's forward line to the calculated spatial grids of Pirlo's thesis. The pragmatist, like Ancelotti, looks at his squad, identifies his game breakers, and bends the tactical shape, like using a narrow diamond, to unleash their raw talent, even if the structure itself looks a bit flawed. The philosopher, like Pirlo, believes that imposing a rigid, highly theoretical spatial grid is the ultimate way to elevate the collective team, ensuring that function triumphs over mere position.
And look, understanding this underlying friction completely changes how you watch the sport. Whether you're tuning in to watch Real Madrid in the Champions League or you're analyzing a Serie B side trying to grind out a result, recognizing these distinct structural philosophies allows you to see the true chess match playing out on the grass. You stop watching just the ball and you start watching the systems.
Which leaves us with one final, fascinating thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. As the game gets faster and the margins get smaller, will the future of football ultimately be ruled by the pure adaptability of the pragmatist or the suffocating, rigid perfection of the philosopher's system? Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.